Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Jules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take, well, frankly, the deluge of global news. Everything from complex geopolitics, big tech failures, amazing science breakthroughs, and try to make sense of it all for you.
It's a lot to sift through, that's for sure. And today's sources, they really paint a picture of a world walking some very fine lines.
Fine lines is a good way to put it. You've got diplomacy on a knife edge, thinking about the ceasefires in the Middle East, the situation in Eastern Europe.
Exactly. And at the same time, our digital world, the stuff we rely on every single minute, it showed just how fragile it can be. We saw that huge Amazon Web Services outage.
Right, the AWS outage, we'll definitely unpack that. But it's not all tension and fragility, is it? There's this incredible counterpoint in science.
Absolutely. Some really hopeful stuff. We're seeing potential leaps forward in how we might treat really huge global health problems like cancer and HIV, things that could genuinely redefine treatment.
So that's our mission today, right? To connect these dots, find the links between the science, the geopolitics, the global economy, and give you that fuller picture.
We'll guide you through it. We'll talk about a potentially revolutionary idea in cancer treatment, maybe not removing lymph nodes. We'll look at the fallout from that AWS crash.
And we'll end somewhere completely different, archaeology. A discovery in Colombia that's, well, it sounds pretty mind-bending, a lost human lineage.
It really is fascinating. Suggests parts of human history we didn't even know existed.
Okay, it sounds like a packed journey. Let's dive right in and start with what feels like the most profound area today, the breakthroughs happening in human health and science. The amount of medical research coming out right now, just based on our sources, it's honestly kind of staggering, especially in oncology and cancer research.
It really is. And this first one, for the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, it's a big one. It challenges something surgeons have done for decades.
You're talking about removing lymph nodes near a tumor?
Exactly. Lymphadenectomy. It's been standard practice forever.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was you take them out to see if the cancer has spread, if it's metastasized, and you remove potential escape routes for the cancer cells.
Makes sense on the surface. Assess the risk, remove the pathway.
Right. But this UCSF study flips that. They're calling it the lymph node paradox. They're asking basically, what's the hidden cost of taking those nodes out?
And the cost is, it hurts at the patient's own ability to fight.
That seems to be the crux of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially now with the rise of immunotherapy. These lymph nodes, they aren't just passive filters sitting there.
They're active.
Very active. They're like the boot camps for your immune system. They're where specialized cells, dendritic cells, show bits of the antigens to your T cells. They train the T cells, essentially, telling them, go find and destroy this.
So removing the lymph nodes is like closing down the training centers?
That's the argument.
Yeah.
The study suggests that by removing them, you might be getting rid of the very T cells that could provide a strong, lasting defense against the tumor, the kind of defense you desperately need for immunotherapies to work well long-term.
Wow. And they have data to back this up.
They do. The research indicated that patients who didn't have their lymph nodes removed showed significantly higher levels of these durable cancer-fighting T cells later on.
That's huge. If this holds up, it changes everything about how certain cancers are approached surgically.
It potentially could, yes. But changing established surgical practice across the globe?
Yeah.
That's a slow process.
Yeah.
Decades of ingrained procedure,
Sure, inertia is powerful in medicine.
It is. But the stakes here are really high. Think about it, we were talking about treatments, immunotherapies that cost a fortune and represent our best hope in many cases. If removing lymph nodes actively undermines those expensive treatments, well, that's a problem you can't ignore.
So the calculation changes. The risk of not changing practice might become greater than the perceived risk of leaving the nodes in.
Precisely. The conversation seems to be shifting from remove to assess risk, towards preserve to maximize the immune response. It's a fundamental rethink.
Okay, moving from preserving the body's defenses to finding new ways to attack the cancer itself. Let's talk about this targeted light therapy. Sounds almost sci-fi. Tin nanoflakes.
It does sound a bit futuristic,
Mm-hmm.
but the principle is actually quite elegant. Researchers, this is out of Texas and Portugal, they've developed these incredibly tiny particles of tin, nanoflakes.
Nanoscopic bits of tin.
Right. And they introduce these near the tumor. Then they shine near-infrared light onto the area. And crucially, this light comes from simple LED lights, which could potentially make it much more affordable and accessible down the line.
So the light hits the tin, then what?
The tin nanoflakes absorb the light energy and convert it into heat. But because they're so small and targeted, the heat is generated in a very, very localized way, right around the tumor cells.
Like tiny targeted heat bombs activated by light.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
And the key findings are the precision and the effectiveness. The study showed they could kill up to 92% of the targeted skin tumor cells.
92%, that's impressive. What about the surrounding healthy tissue? That's always the problem with chemo and radiation.
That's the critical advantage here. Because the light is targeted and the heat effect is so localized and dissipates quickly, the surrounding healthy tissue was reportedly unharmed. It avoids that widespread toxicity, that collateral damage you see with traditional treatments.
High effectiveness, low side effects, potentially lower costs. That really does sound like a potential game changer, especially for things like skin cancer.
It certainly has that potential. Early days, of course, but very promising.
Okay, sticking with major health challenges. HIV. There's been talk of cures for years, but often it's about suppression, not elimination. Now we're hearing about a functional cure.
Yes, and this is really significant movement. We're talking about a gene editing treatment called EBT-101. It's actually received fast-track designation from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA.
Gene editing. So this is aiming to actually change the underlying situation, not just manage symptoms.
Exactly. It's designed to tackle the core problem with HIV, the viral reservoir.
Can you explain what that reservoir is? Where the virus hides?
Sure. So the current standard treatment, antiretroviral therapy or ART daily pills, it's incredibly effective at stopping the virus from replicating in the bloodstream. It keeps the active virus load very low.
Right, undetectable levels often.
Correct.
Yeah.
But ART can't reach the virus that's essentially gone dormant, hidden inside the genetic material of the body's own resting immune cells. These cells aren't actively dividing, so the virus just sits there sleeping.
Yeah.
That's the reservoir.
And if someone starts taking their ART medication?
The virus wakes up, it comes out of the reservoir and starts replicating again. That's why ART has to be lifelong.
So EBT-101 tries to, what, snip the virus out?
That's the idea. It uses gene editing technology, like CRISPR, to find the hidden HIV DNA within the host cell's genome and literally cut it out, effectively destroying that latent virus, tackling the reservoir directly.
And the results reported out of Emory University, 99.99% clearance. That sounds almost too good to be true.
It's a dramatic figure, absolutely. We need to be cautious, see more data, larger trials, but achieving that level of clearance of the reservoir is potentially transformative.
What's the difference between this functional cure and a complete sterilizing cure?
A sterilizing cure means every single trace of the virus is gone, eradicated. A functional cure means the virus is reduced to such incredibly low levels, particularly in the reservoir, that it's undetectable, can't replicate effectively, and doesn't cause disease progression. Crucially, it could mean the patient can safely stop taking daily ART.
That alone would be life-changing for millions. Removing the need for lifelong medication, the side effects, the stigma.
A physical and psychological burden, absolutely. And it would also massively reduce the potential for transmission. It's a huge step if these results hold up in scale.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. Still in genetics, but looking at something more foundational. Our biological clocks. We hear a lot about the maternal age effect, but this research highlights the paternal age effect.
Yes, and it adds a really important layer to conversations about family planning, especially with trends towards later parenthood in many parts of the world.
So what's happening as men age?
The research confirms something suspected for a while. As men get older, new genetic mutations accumulate in their sperm cells. It's not just wear and tear. It's linked to the continuous process of sperm production, spermatogenesis, which involves constant cell division. Errors can creep in over time.
And they've quantified this. There's a specific rate.
They have. The study suggests an average rate of about 1.67 new mutations per haploid genome per year.
Okay, break down haploid genome for us.
Sure. Your regular body cells are diploid. They have two sets of chromosomes, one from each parent. Sperm and egg cells are haploid. They only have a single set of chromosomes carrying the genetic information to be passed on. So 1.67 new mutations in that single set of instructions every year, on average.
And what are the consequences of these accumulating mutations?
That's the crucial part. This accumulation is statistically linked to increased risks for certain complex genetic disorders in the children conceived. The research specifically mentions conditions like autism spectrum disorder and schizophrenia.
So this isn't saying older men shouldn't have children, but
it's saying there's a biological factor to consider.
Yeah.
It needs to be part of the conversation in genetic counseling. It makes it clear that the biological clock isn't just a female phenomenon. It affects male fertility and potential offspring health too, just through a different mechanism.
Really important information for people planning families later in life. Okay, let's shift to a very practical, widespread health issue. Iron deficiency. Anemia affects billions, right?
2 billion people worldwide, estimates suggest. It's a massive public health problem, especially in developing countries, but common everywhere.
And the standard treatment is simple iron supplements, usually ferrous sulfate, cheap, available. But there's a catch.
A huge catch. Compliance. People often stop taking their iron pills, and the reason is usually the side effects.
What kind of side effects?
Mostly gastrointestinal distress, constipation, stomach pain, nausea. It can be really unpleasant, and it happens because unbound iron, the form in many basic supplements, doesn't play well with the gut environment. It can irritate the gut lining, disrupt the balance of bacteria, the microbiome.
So people feel lousy and just give up, and the anemia doesn't get treated.
Exactly. It's a classic problem where the treatment itself undermines adherence. But now there's a new approach mentioned in the sources, a triple action supplement.
Triple action. What's in it besides iron?
This is where it gets clever. It combines the iron with probiotics, beneficial gut bacteria, and prebiotics.
Prebiotics, that's the food for the good bacteria, right? Like fiber.
Precisely. So the idea is holistic. Instead of just dumping iron into the system, you're actively supporting the gut microbiome at the same time. A healthy gut environment should improve iron absorption and buffer those nasty side effects.
So you tackle the side effect problem and potentially make the iron work better anyway.
That's the goal. Treat the whole system, not just a single deficiency. It's about making the treatment tolerable, which is key for actually solving the underlying anemia problem for those 2 billion people.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, let's end this science segment on a real positive note. A public health success story. Peanut allergies.
Yes, this is a fantastic example of how science can and should lead to changes in public health advice, even when it goes against long-held beliefs.
What was the old belief? Avoidance, right. Keep peanuts away from babies.
For years, that was the standard advice. Total avoidance in early life was thought to prevent the allergy from developing.
But the science pointed somewhere else.
It did. Strong evidence started emerging, particularly from studies like the LAP study, suggesting that early introduction of peanuts, often between 4 to 6 months for infants at risk, could actually prevent the allergy.
So the exact opposite of avoidance, exposure is key.
Exactly. Based on that robust evidence, guidelines were officially changed in many countries, encouraging parents to introduce peanut products early and often, under guidance, of course.
And the results.
Pretty remarkable. The sources mention estimates that around 60,000 children in recent years have likely avoided developing a peanut allergy, specifically because of these revised guidelines.
60,000 kids potentially spared a life-threatening allergy. That's huge.
It really is. It's a testament to evidence-based medicine and the willingness to change practice when the data is clear. Sometimes, facing the potential allergen early is the best defense.
Okay. From the resilience and adaptability of the human body, let's shift gears completely. Let's talk about the systems we've built, specifically our digital infrastructure. And wow, did we see some fragility there recently with the big Amazon Web Services outage?
Yeah, that AWS outage was significant. It wasn't just a minor blip. It really underscored how much of the modern world runs on these massive centralized cloud platforms.
Where did this one originate? What went wrong?
The reports point to Amazon's U.S. East 1 region. That's their oldest and largest data center region, located in Northern Virginia. The specific issue seemed to be with high error rates in their DynamoDB service.
DynamoDB, that's a database service.
It's a key value and document database, yeah. Yep. A fundamental building block for a lot of applications hosted on AWS. And when it started failing in US East 1, the dominoes started falling very quickly.
And the scale of the impact was just vast. It wasn't just websites being slow.
No, far beyond that. We saw major financial services get hit. Think cryptocurrency exchanges like Coinbase, trading apps like Robinhood, even traditional banks like Lloyds Bank reported issues. Critical infrastructure.
And then communications, Signal, Zoom. People rely on those daily.
Absolutely. Entertainment platforms too, Fortnite, Roblox, Snapchat users all experience problems. Even things you might not think about immediately, like airline check-in systems, were affected. It was global.
It really drives home that point about centralization, doesn't it? So much dependent on one company and often one specific region within that company's network.
It does. And it raises serious questions about redundancy. A lot of companies say they have multi-region redundancy. But when US East 1 wobbles, why do so many services seem to be impacted simultaneously?
Maybe their core dependencies or their failover mechanisms aren't as robust or independent as they think?
That's the suspicion. Perhaps critical control planes or authentication services are still too heavily reliant on that main region. It suggests that true independent redundancy is harder, or maybe more expensive to achieve, than many assume.
So, when the biggest cloud provider sneezes in its main hub,
The global digital economy catches a pretty bad cold. It's a stark reminder of the systemic risk embedded in this architecture.
this fragility provides a really interesting contrast to our next topic, doesn't it? Moving from digital failures on Earth to massive technological ambition in space.
It really does. You have SpaceX hitting this incredible milestone, launching its 10,000th Starlink satellite.
10,000, that number's just mind-boggling.
It's a phenomenal achievement in terms of launch cadence and manufacturing scale. It underlines their commitment to building out this global constellation for high-speed internet, aiming to connect underserved areas. A huge technological feat.
But that ambition, that goal of global connectivity, it's immediately running into some very messy realities on the ground. Tell us about the Starlink situation in Myanmar.
Yeah, this is the dark side of that same technology. While SpaceX is launching satellites, reports emerged of Myanmar's military junta raiding an illegal internet scam operation. And how is this scam hub getting its internet connection in a likely remote, poorly connected area?
Let me guess. Starlink.
Bingo. They were using unlicensed Starlink receivers. Because the system is designed to work anywhere with a view of the sky, bypassing local telecoms infrastructure, it's become attractive to groups operating outside the law in border regions or areas with weak governance.
And these weren't just small-time scams, right? This involves some pretty horrific stuff.
According to the reports, absolutely. These operations allegedly involve human trafficking, with people forced to work in these scam centers, running large-scale online fraud schemes. The estimated cost of victims globally from operations like these was cited at around $37 billion just in 2023.
$37 billion. Facilitated in part by technology designed to connect the unconnected.
It's a stark illustration of technology as a double-edged sword. It's morally neutral. A tool designed for bridging the digital divide can be immediately weaponized for massive criminal enterprises in the right, or perhaps wrong, environment, one lacking regulation and enforcement.
It shows how quickly the digital Wild West can adapt to even the most advanced technologies. Okay, staying in space for a moment longer, we have the beauty and the threat side by side.
We do. On the beautiful side, for anyone looking up, it's a good time. We've got Comet Lemon and Comet Swan making relatively close approaches, plus the Orionid meteor shower is active.
And good viewing conditions.
Apparently so. Favored by the new moon, meaning darker skies. A nice reminder of the cosmic backdrop to all our terrestrial squabbles.
But those squabbles are increasingly moving into space, aren't they? The concern about orbital conflict.
Yes, that's the serious counterpoint. Analysts are no longer talking about if there will be conflict in space, but increasingly when and how. Space is rapidly becoming a contested domain, a potential battlefield.
What does that look like? What are countries doing?
We're seeing the development and testing of anti-satellite weapons, or ASATs. These can be kinetic missiles that physically destroy a satellite or non-kinetic, like jamming, spoofing, cyber attacks, or even directed energy weapons. Plus, sophisticated surveillance satellites watching other satellites.
And with constellations like Starlink adding thousands of objects, it's getting crowded up there.
Extremely crowded. And that's part of the danger. A conflict involving ASATs doesn't just destroy one target. It can create massive debris fields.
Space junk, traveling at incredible speed.
Exactly. Thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of pieces of shrapnel orbiting uncontrollably. A single major kinetic event could render vital orbits unusable for decades, potentially creating a cascading effect known as the Kessler syndrome.
Which would threaten pretty much everything.
Pretty much everything that relies on satellites. GPS navigation, weather forecasting, global communications, financial transactions, military intelligence, all severely degraded or knocked out. So safeguarding satellites and establishing clear rules of engagement in space isn't just a military issue, it's critical for the entire global economy and modern life.
A very sobering thought. Okay, let's bring our focus back down to Earth and look at those geopolitical tensions you mentioned earlier. All right, turning to the global stage. Diplomacy, conflict, shifting alliances. Let's start in the Middle East. There was a U.S.-brokered ceasefire in Gaza. How is that holding up?
Precariously is probably the best word. It recently survived a major test. After 2 Israeli soldiers were killed, Israel launched immediate retaliatory strikes into Gaza.
And the impact of those strikes.
Palestinian sources reported significant casualties, 26 people killed, including civilians. It was a serious escalation, a real stress test for the truce.
But the ceasefire didn't collapse.
Ultimately, no. Both Hamas officials and the Israeli government, despite the violence, reaffirmed their commitment to the ceasefire terms. There's immense pressure, obviously, both internally and internationally, to maintain it, even when these incidents happen.
The messaging around it seems very divided, though. You had the U.S. envoy Jared Kushner saying Hamas seemed to be acting in good faith.
Right, suggesting a commitment from their side to making the truce work. But that's immediately contrasted with voices inside Israel, like the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir.
What's his stance?
Very hard line. After some hostages were returned, he was demanding an immediate end to the truce, basically saying any provocation should be met with overwhelming force, restart full military operations.
So a real split within the Israeli leadership itself about the path forward, stability versus immediate security response.
Exactly. It shows the fragility isn't just about actions on the ground, but also about the political will and consensus needed to sustain even a temporary calm.
And this tension isn't just confined to Gaza, is it? There's the situation on the Israel-Lebanon border. Analysts are calling it a less fire.
Yeah, less fire. It's a grim term. It basically describes a state of ongoing, managed, low-level conflict. Not quite peace, not quite all-out war.
What does that look like in practice?
It mainly involves cross-border strikes, primarily Israeli operations targeting what they identify as Hezbollah positions or infrastructure in southern Lebanon. The stated aim is deterrence, keeping Hezbollah off balance.
But these strikes have consequences.
They do. There have been civilian casualties reported in Lebanon, which obviously raises tensions and questions about the legitimacy of targets and proportionality. Hezbollah retaliates, but typically in a limited way.
So it's like carefully calibrated violence on both sides to avoid triggering a full-blown war.
That seems to be the dynamic, a very dangerous balancing act. The rules are unwritten, constantly being tested, and could easily spiral out of control. It's a simmering conflict zone maintained through deterrence, not resolution.
Okay, let's shift focus to Eastern Europe, to the war in Ukraine. There's buzz about a potential summit in Budapest, Hungary. Involving who?
This is significant. The plan is for a summit involving Russian President Vladimir Putin and the current U.S. President Donald Trump, hosted in Budapest.
Budapest.
Why there?
The location is key. A Kremlin spokesperson explicitly mentioned Hungary was chosen because Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban maintains good working relations with both President Putin and President Trump. Orban is often seen as, let's say, more sympathetic to Moscow than many other European Union leaders.
So Orban acts as a sort of facilitator, providing neutral ground.
Or perhaps neutral but acceptable ground for both sides. It allows for a high-stakes meeting outside the more adversarial context of Brussels or Washington.
What about Ukraine's involvement? President Zelensky.
That's where it gets very complicated. President Zelensky has said he's willing to participate if he's invited. But he's drawn a very firm line in the sand.
No territorial concessions. Absolutely rejecting any kind of land swap deal, which is something rumored to be favored by President Trump as a way to end the fighting.
And what is President Trump's stated position on the war?
President Trump has publicly said he believes Ukraine won't win the war. His suggested approach leans toward freezing the conflict along the current front lines.
Freezing the lines, which effectively means what?
It implies acknowledging Russia's current control over the territory it occupies, which is estimated at around 78% of the Donbas region, plus Crimea. It means stopping the fighting but not resolving the underlying territorial dispute, basically cementing the current division.
And Zelensky's response to that idea?
Forceful rejection. He's insisted Ukrainian troops will not withdraw and that Ukraine's territorial integrity is non-negotiable. So you have a fundamental clash. One side suggesting freezing the lines, the other demanding full restoration of territory. Makes any potential summit incredibly complex.
This wider strategic tension, particularly between the West and Russia, it's also playing out economically, right? In energy policy.
Very much so. We saw a major decision from the European Union. They've formally agreed to phase out imports of Russian gas.
Completely phase out. When?
Then, the target date is the end of 2027. They've allowed for some transition periods for existing contracts, possibly extending into 2028, but the strategic direction is clear.
Why now? What's the driver?
It's about energy security and strategic decoupling. Reducing reliance on Russian energy has been a goal, obviously accelerated by the war in Ukraine. It's about removing that leverage Moscow has had over European energy supplies. It's a huge geopolitical shift driven by economic and security concerns. Ties into that theme of decentralizing critical resources we talked about earlier.
Right, moving away from single points of dependency.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the Western Hemisphere now. Tensions reported between the U.S. and Colombia.
Yes, a significant diplomatic spat erupted. It followed a U.S. military strike aimed at individuals linked to the ELN rebel group in Colombia.
ELN, that's the National Liberation Army, involved in drug trafficking.
Correct. Deeply involved in the narcotics trade. After the strike, which resulted in casualties, Colombian President Gustavo Petro reacted very strongly. He publicly accused the United States of murder.
That's strong language between allies. What was the U.S. response?
Pretty swift and direct. President Trump announced a halt to certain financial aid packages going to Colombia. This really strains the relationship, particularly cooperation on counter-narcotics efforts, which has been a cornerstone for decades.
So a real breakdown over security policy and sovereignty issues.
It seems so. It highlights the complexities of intervention and partnership in tackling transnational crime.
Interestingly, while U.S.-Colombia relations are strained, there's been a big political shift in neighboring Bolivia.
Yes. Quite a pivot. Bolivia elected a new president, Rodrigo Paz, who comes from a center-right background.
And this marks a change from
nearly 2 decades of rule by the Movement for Socialism, or MAS party, associated with figures like Evo Morales. So it's a significant ideological shift for the country.
What are the expectations for President Paz's foreign policy?
The expectation is a clear pivot towards stronger relations with the United States, moving away from the previous government's more left-leaning, sometimes anti-U.S. stance.
And economically, does this connect to anything broader?
Potentially, yes. Bolivia is looking to stabilize its economy, and crucially, it sits on vast reserves of lithium, a critical mineral for batteries, electric vehicles, etc. A closer relationship with the U.S. could facilitate investment and development of those resources, tying directly into those global efforts to diversify supply chains away from single sources like China. So, a political shift with big potential economic and strategic implications.
Okay, let's connect these geopolitical shifts directly to the economy and market reactions. We saw stock markets reacting positively, didn't we, in the U.S. and Hong Kong?
We did. There was a noticeable rise in stock futures, and the driving factors seemed to be sentiment around U.S.-China trade relations.
What changed the sentiment?
It appears to have been linked directly to comments from President Trump. He publicly stated that some of the extra tariffs imposed on Chinese goods were, in his words, not sustainable.
So the markets interpreted that as a signal towards de-escalation. Less trade war fiction.
Exactly. Markets generally dislike uncertainty and trade barriers. So any hint of tariffs potentially being eased or rolled back tends to boost confidence, at least in the short term. It suggests a possible shift towards a less confrontational trade stance.
But does this mean the underlying competition is over?
Oh, almost certainly not. While specific tariffs might be adjusted, the broader strategic competition between the U.S. and China, particularly over technology, critical resources, and global influence, that remains very much in play, which leads us back to diversification.
Right, the push to build alternative supply chains, especially for things like rare earth elements.
Absolutely. And we're seeing concrete policy actions there. The U.S. firmed up an agreement with Australia, specifically focused on securing and processing rare earths and other critical minerals.
The goal being to reduce dependence on China, which dominates that market currently.
Precisely. It's a clear strategic move to build resilience and security into critical supply chains. And you saw the market react to this specific alignment, too.
How so?
The stock price of Cleveland Cliffs, a U.S. mining company, saw a significant jump. Why? Because they announced plans to ramp up their own rare earth mining operations, directly aligning their business strategy with this government-backed push for domestic and allied sourcing.
So corporate strategy explicitly following geopolitical strategy.
It's becoming increasingly common. Where governments direct strategic investment or de-risk certain sectors, companies adjust their plans accordingly. The rare earth scramble is a prime example.
While new strategies are forming, the economic consequences of past decisions are still being debated. Let's talk about the UK and Brexit.
Yes, the Shadow Chancellor in the UK, Rachel Reeves, gave a pretty stark assessment of the economic impact of the current Brexit deal.
What was her conclusion?
Quite blunt. She stated that the deal has caused long-term damage to the UK economy. She didn't just make a general statement, she pointed to specific areas.
Such
reduced trade volumes with the European Union compared to pre-Brexit levels, disruptions to investment flows, and ongoing complexities in supply chains for businesses trading with the EU.
So the debate about the economic pros and cons is far from settled. The costs are still being tallied and argued over.
Very much so. It highlights how major shifts in trade policy can have deep, lingering effects that continue to shape economic performance years later.
Okay, from macroeconomics to something slightly more micro, but definitely hitting consumers. This chocolate label crisis in the UK. This sounds almost comical, but it's real.
It sounds trivial, but it's a fascinating, very real consequence of global commodity price shocks. Cocoa prices have gone through the roof recently. Supply issues, bad weather in growing regions. The cost is astronomical for manufacturers.
So companies that make chocolate bars are feeling the pinch.
Immensely. And to manage these soaring costs, some manufacturers of well-known British snacks, the sources mention things like penguin bars, club bars, they're having to reformulate their recipes.
Meaning less chocolate.
Effectively, yes. Reducing the percentage of cocoa content to save money. But there's a legal threshold in the UK. A minimum percentage of cocoa solids required for a product to actually be labeled and sold as chocolate.
Wait, so if they reduce the cocoa too much?
They literally can't call it chocolate anymore. They fall below the legal standard. They'll have to change their packaging, their marketing, maybe call it chocolate flavored or something else.
Wow. Global inflation forcing a penguin bar to potentially renounce its chocolate identity. That's something.
It's a small but telling sign of how these big economic forces ripple all the way down to the ingredients in your snack food.
That small change contrasts sharply with bigger contractions we're seeing, like in the UK hospitality sector. Pizza Hut closures?
Yes, that was a significant announcement. Pizza Hut is closing 68 of its restaurants in the UK. That means 1,210 job losses.
Why are they doing that? What are the pressures?
It reflects a couple of major trends hitting the casual dining sector hard. Firstly, rising operational costs, everything from energy bills to wages to the cost of ingredients, like the flour and cheese for pizzas.
And secondly, changes in how people eat.
Exactly. There's been a huge, sustained shift towards delivery and takeaway, accelerated by the pandemic but continuing now. Large, sit-down restaurant formats are expensive to run and might not match current consumer preferences as much as they used to.
So chains like Pizza Hut are shrinking their physical footprint, focusing more on delivery hubs.
That seems to be the strategy, adapting to survive in a tougher market with different customer behavior. It's a painful adjustment with real job losses.
Okay, let's end our deep dive today with something truly deep. Back thousands of years, this archaeological discovery in Colombia.
This one is genuinely fascinating. Researchers uncovered human remains in the Colombian highlands, dated to about 6,000 years ago.
6,000 years old. That's significant in itself for the Americas.
It is. But the really startling part came from the genetic analysis they performed on the ancient DNA extracted from these remains.
What did the DNA show? Or rather, what didn't it show?
That's the key. The analysis revealed that this ancient DNA doesn't match any known living populations today, nor does it match the genetic profiles of other known ancient or extinct human groups, like the well-documented migrations into the Americas, or even older groups like Neanderthals or Denisovans, whose DNA sometimes persists.
So it's completely distinct. A lineage with no known relatives, living or dead.
That's what the findings suggest. They're calling it a ghost lineage, a population group that apparently existed, perhaps thrived in isolation in those high-altitude regions for a considerable time, but left no direct genetic descendants that we can currently trace.
How does that change our understanding of human history in the Americas?
It potentially complicates it significantly. Our models of migration and settlement are often quite linear. People arrived, spread out, replaced, or mixed with earlier groups. This suggests the picture might have been much more complex, with multiple distinct populations coexisting or existing sequentially, some of whom simply vanished over time without contributing their genes to later populations.
So branches of the human family tree that just ended died out completely.
It seems possible. It's a powerful reminder that the story of human expansion across the globe wasn't necessarily a smooth, continuous process. There might have been many experiments, many groups that adapted to specific environments, like these Colombian highlands, and then disappeared due to climate change, disease, conflict, or just being genetically overwhelmed by later arrivals.
A lost strand of humanity. That's quite a thought to end on. It really puts our current moment in perspective. What a journey today. You went from the cutting edge of cancer therapy, rethinking surgery based on the immune system,
to the stark reality of our digital dependence when AWS went down. That fragility was really laid bare.
We saw the strategic chess game being played with energy resources in Europe, the intense diplomacy around ceasefires and potential summits.
And then, yeah, that discovery in Colombia, finding a ghost lineage, a whole branch of the human story we didn't know was there. It's humbling.
Is there a common thread you see running through all this? From preserving lymph nodes to securing rare earths?
I think there is. It's this move towards resilience through diversification, whether it's diversifying our energy sources away from Russia or diversifying mineral supply chains away from China, or even understanding the need to preserve the body's diverse immune toolkit.
It's all about avoiding single points of failure, building in more options, more robustness.
Exactly. The world seems to be learning, sometimes the hard way, like with the AWS outage, that over-centralization creates unacceptable risks. We need redundancy, alternative, decentralized systems, whether that's in technology, geopolitics, or even biology.
We started today talking about those incredible scientific leaps, particularly in health, cures that seemed impossible not long ago.
We did. And it makes you think. Looking forward, so much of what we need to solve resolving conflicts, transitioning to sustainable energy, maybe even managing future pandemics. It seems less reliant purely on traditional diplomacy and more on our ability to successfully decentralize the critical things we depend on.
Whether that's minerals, medicines, information.
Or the internet itself, which leads to a question, maybe for you, the listener, to ponder. Looking at our world today, with all its interdependencies, what resource, currently highly centralized, do you think poses the biggest, perhaps most overlooked risk to global stability if it were to fail or be controlled by too few hands? What's our next big single point of failure we haven't fully reckoned with?
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.